The alarm did not build up slowly. It hit all at once, a sharp, piercing tone that cut straight through the hum of the ship's engines and punched me. Out of the light sleep I had trained myself to keep for exactly this reason. I was off my bunk and on my feet before my eyes had fully adjusted to the dim blue glow of the sleeping quarters. 3 ships, unregistered, dropping out a dark fold less than 400 meters off the port side. I already knew what that meant. My name is Kara Linden. I am 32 years old. I spent 8 years as a combat medic with the Northern Earth Rapid Response Unit, and another 4 years after that as a licensed neutral zone escort, which is a polite way of saying that I am a human being who gets paid to ride alien ships through dangerous parts of the galaxy and keep whatever they are carrying safe. I have worked 14 contracts. I have been shot at 7 times. I have been in 3 ship collisions, 2 hostage situations, and 1 event that the official report called a navigational misunderstanding, but that I still have nightmares about twice a week. This was Contract 15. The ship was called the Velshra Patience. It was a mid-class merchant cruiser owned and operated by the Velshra, a species that I had been briefed on thoroughly before accepting the job. They were tall, roughly 7 feet on average, with narrow, angular frames, 6-jointed arms, and a set of secondary eyes along their jawline that could detect motion at an extraordinary range. They wore flowing layered garments in pale gold and silver, and they carried themselves with the kind of quiet dignity that made you feel like you were always slightly underdressed and slightly too loud. They were brilliant engineers, remarkable diplomats, and as a species, almost completely unbearable when it came to their opinion of humans. Not malicious, just dismissive, the way someone might feel about a stray dog that had learned a few tricks. Useful, perhaps. Charming, in a limited way, but not worth serious consideration. I had made my peace with that before boarding. My contract was specific. Escort 6 Velshra children, young nobles, the sons and daughters of high-ranking diplomatic families, from Waystation Orin on the edge of contested fringe back to the Velshra home cluster. A 12-day journey through space that was technically neutral but practically lawless. The kind of route that any rational captain would want a trained escort for, regardless of what they thought of the escort species. The children ranged in age from what I understood to be roughly equivalent to 6 human years up to about 14. They were nervous around me at first, the way children are around anything unfamiliar. Then they became curious. Then, as children tend to do, they became comfortable enough to occasionally be unkind, repeating things they had heard their parents say, calling me the soft one or the groundwalker in their own language, not realizing or not caring that I had studied enough Velshra to understand most of it. 5 of the 6 did this. The 6th was different. I called her Pip in my head because I could not comfortably pronounce her actual name, which involved a sound that required 2 of the jawline eyes to vibrate simultaneously. She was the smallest of the group, roughly equivalent to a 7-year-old by human developmental standards, and she did not call me names. She watched me instead, carefully, constantly, with all 8 of her eyes in that particular wide-open configuration that I had come to recognize as genuine concentration in Velshra children. She watched me the way I had watched my instructors back in training, like she was trying to memorize something important. On day 4 of the journey, I noticed the comms chatter. It was not the kind of thing the Velshra captain, a sharp-featured male named Veltas, thought worth mentioning to me. It was not even the kind of thing his crew spoke about loudly, but I had quietly requested read access to the navigation frequency logs on day 1 as a standard precaution, and what I was reading on day 4 made the back of my neck go cold. Dren Raiders. 3 confirmed sightings in this sector within the past 9 standard days. 2 merchant vessels reporting non-fatal boarding incidents. 1 vessel, a Theran passenger carrier, simply gone. No debris recovered, no distress signal received, just gone. I went to Veltas and told him I wanted to run a defensive systems check and identify secondary shelter points throughout the ship. He looked at me the way I had come to expect, with the particular tilt of the upper jaw that meant mild condescension, and told me that the Dren activity was concentrated in the outer shipping lanes, not on this route, and that the Velshra patients had registered transponder codes that no raider in their right mind would want to challenge. I nodded. I said I understood. Then I went and ran the systems check anyway. The cargo hold on sublevel 2 was the best position. Single entry point, a reinforced door with a manual override lock that I could engage from the inside. A secondary access panel that I quietly rewired to require a non-standard code sequence that only I knew. Good sight lines to both the entrance and the air recycler panel, which I noted as a potential asset. Steel walls, no windows, Enough space for 6 children and 1 adult to move around without crowding. I memorized 3 routes from the children's quarters to that hold. I made sure I could run all 3 in the dark. I set my sleep cycle to light alert. I kept my stun baton charged and within arm's reach. On day 6, at approximately 3 in the morning ship time, the proximity alarm went off. I was already moving before the second pulse sounded. I hit the corridor at a full run, heading for the children's quarters, and behind me I could hear the low, resonant groan of the ship's hull as something latched on from outside. That sound, metal against metal, the mechanical bite of a boarding clamp, is not something you forget once you have heard it. It is the sound of a decision being made by someone else about your immediate future. I had 2 minutes, maybe 3, before they were through the outer lock. I got to the children's quarters and pushed the door open. 6 pairs of eyes blinked at me from their sleeping cushions, wide and alarmed and confused. I did not explain. There was no time for explanation. I said one word in Velshra, the word that roughly translated to follow me right now, and I said it in the tone that left no room for argument. They followed me. Pip was the last one out of the room, and she paused in the doorway for just a moment, looking up at me with those wide, serious eyes. "Where are we going?" in careful formal Velshra. "Somewhere safe," I told her. She nodded once and ran. We made it to sublevel 2 in 90 seconds. I got all 6 children through the hold door, engaged the manual lock, entered my override code on the access panel, and turned around to find them clustered together in the center of the room, arms wrapped around one another, staring at me. Somewhere above us I heard the sound of boots on metal. They were already inside the ship. I checked my stun baton. Full charge. I checked the hold door. Secure. I checked the air recycler panel. Right where I remembered it. I checked the children. 6 faces, all frightened, all looking at me. I took one breath, slow and deliberate, let it out the same way. Then I turned to face the door and I waited. The dream came in fast and with confidence, the way people do when they have done something enough times to stop being afraid of it. There were 6 of them in the initial boarding party, moving through the upper decks of the ship with the kind of coordinated efficiency that told me immediately these were not amateurs. They were professionals. They had done this before, probably dozens of times, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. What they were looking for, on a Velshra diplomatic vessel carrying noble-born young, was exactly what I was standing between them and. Velshra children of high lineage represented significant ransom value. The Dren Raider Compact operated on a simple economic model. Identify high-value cargo, acquire it quickly, deliver it to a holding point, collect payment. They were not in the business of unnecessary harm. They were in the business of leverage, which in some ways made them more dangerous than an enemy who simply wanted to destroy things, because they were calm about it, businesslike, patient. I was none of those things, not in that moment, but I was trained. I heard them working their way down through the ship. I heard Veltas saying something sharp and outraged, and then going silent in a way that told me he had been restrained but not harmed. I heard the crew quarters being checked, one by one. I heard footsteps pause outside the sublevel 2 corridor, and then continue down toward the hold. I stood to the left of the door, not directly in front of it. Old habit. Doorways are fatal ground if you are standing in the middle of them. The first attempt on the door was a standard lock release pulse. It did not work because I had rewired the access panel. There was a pause. I could almost feel the confusion through the metal. And then a second attempt using what sounded like a bypass toolkit. That did not work either. Then a voice from the other said, in rough but understandable galactic common, "Open the door. No harm will come to the young ones. We need only temporary custody. Open the door and this ends quietly." I said nothing. There was another pause. Then the sound of a manual cutting tool beginning to work on the door's lower hinge. They were going to take it apart. That was going to take approximately 4 minutes for a door this grade, which I knew because I had looked it up when I was running my systems check on day 4. 4 minutes was enough. I went to the air recycler panel and opened it. The Drain were wearing standard radar gear, sealed suits, partial respiratory filtration, good enough to filter out most common atmospheric contaminants. Not designed to handle a full recycler loop interruption paired with a targeted electrical surge through the ventilation system, which I could produce using the panel's manual override settings and the emergency power coupling that ran along the inside of the hold's left wall. I am a medic. I understand how bodies work. I understand what they need and what happens when those things are disrupted. I had spent 8 years learning how to keep people alive in situations where everything was trying to kill them. The knowledge works in both directions. I had always known that. I had never particularly enjoyed knowing it, but in moments like this one, I was glad I did. The recycler adjustment I made would not cause permanent harm. It would cause the air in the corridor outside the door to become very unpleasant very quickly. Dense, warm, oxygen depleted. And it would cause the electrical systems in the corridor panels to behave erratically. Disorienting. Uncomfortable. Enough to slow them down significantly. I told the children to move to the far corner of the hold and stay low. Pip looked at me for a second longer than the others before she went. The cutting tool on the door slowed, then stopped. I heard coughing. I heard movement that was less coordinated than it had been 30 seconds ago. I heard someone barking an order in a Dren dialect I mostly understood, telling the others to pull back and switch to backup filters. They had backup filters. Of course they did. That bought me perhaps another 2 minutes, not 4. But 2 minutes was still something. When the door finally came off its lower hinge and swung inward, I was ready. The first one through was large and moved with a kind of weight that suggested he was used to people getting out of his way. I let him take 3 steps inside before I moved. A stun baton at the right contact point on a drain, the cluster of nerve nodes just below the left shoulder plate, produces immediate and complete incapacitation with 0 permanent damage. He went down before he understood what had happened. The second one was faster. He caught my arm and pulled, which was a reasonable instinct but a tactical mistake, because pulling me closer to him meant I was inside his reach before he could redirect to anything useful. I am not large. I am not, by any galactic standard, physically impressive. But I was trained by people who understood that size is a factor and leverage is a principle, and principles beat factors if you understand them well enough. He went down. I was hit from behind by the third one. A glancing strike to my right shoulder that sent me sideways and lit up my arm with a deep, sharp pain that I catalogued as significant but not structural, and set aside. There was no time for it. I turned into the follow-up strike instead of away from it, which surprised him enough that he hesitated for half a second, and half a second was all I needed. The fourth and fifth came together. 2 at once is not ideal. 2 at once when one of your arms is not responding at full capacity is worse. But the hold was small, which meant they could not use their numerical advantage effectively, and I had been in small spaces with multiple opponents before. I kept moving. I kept them off balance. I used the walls and the floor and everything in the room that was not a child. It took longer than the first 3 had taken. I took 2 more hits, one to my ribs that made breathing deeply unpleasant, and one to my left knee that I was going to feel for weeks. But when it was over, 4 Dren were on the floor of the hold, incapacitated and secured with the emergency restraint ties I had put in my jacket pocket on day 4 when I was running my systems check, because I had been waiting for exactly this. Then the 6th one came through the door. He was different from the others. Not physically larger, but he moved differently, carefully, with deliberate control, the way someone moves when they are in charge and they know it. He wore a different mark on his shoulder plate, the Raider Commander's sigil. His name, I would learn later, was WorldEarth, and he had been running boarding operations for the Dren Compact for 11 years. He did not come in fast. He came in slow, and he came in with one of the children, Pip. She had not been in the far corner with the others when the door came down. I did not know when she had moved or why, and it did not matter right now. What mattered was that Vorath had one 6-jointed hand wrapped carefully but firmly around her narrow shoulder, and he was holding her the way someone holds a thing they intend to use. He looked at the 4 bodies on the floor. He looked at me. His expression did not change much, which was more unsettling than anger would have been. "You are very capable," he said, in Galactic Common. For a groundwalker, I did not answer. I was looking at Pip. She was not making a sound. Her 8 eyes were wide open, all of them fixed on me, and they were not afraid. Or rather, the fear was there, but something else was layered on top of it. Something that looked almost like focus, like she was paying very close attention to what I was going to do next. "Release the child," I said. "Take your crew and leave the ship." That has tilted his head. "I am a reasonable being," he said. "I accept losses as a cost of operations, but I did not come to this sector empty-handed. I will have something for my trouble. The young ones are coming with me. You may stand aside, or you may." "Release the child," I said again. "You have 10 seconds. He seemed genuinely amused. "Or what, groundwalker?" I looked at him. Not at Pip. At him. I have been told, by people who have been on the wrong side of that particular look, that there is something in the way humans hold eye contact under pressure that is genuinely difficult to understand. That it reads as something other than threat. Something older. I told him very quietly what I was going to do to him if he did not release her in the next 10 seconds. I did not raise my voice. I did not use dramatic language. I used accurate language, specific, clinical, the way I had been taught to describe medical procedures. He heard me out. At 7 seconds, I watched something change in his expression. At 8, his grip on Pip's shoulder loosened. At 9, she stepped away from him and walked. Did not run, walked, with her chin level and her eyes still on me, to the far corner of the hold where the other children were. WorldEarth made one more decision after that, which was the wrong one. He reached for the signaling device on his forearm, which would have triggered a retrieval pod release from one of his ships. I got to him before his fingers completed the contact sequence. What followed was not elegant, and I am not going to describe it in detail, but when it was over, he was on the floor next to his crew, and I was standing in the middle of the hold with my hands shaking and my ribs telling me very clearly that I had made several bad choices in the last 15 minutes. The Drain Raider ships, operating on an automatic protocol that required commander confirmation every 12 minutes during a boarding action, received no confirmation. The protocol triggered an emergency withdrawal sequence. All 3 ships pulled back and jumped to Darkfold inside 4 minutes. They left their entire boarding party behind. I checked on the children. All 6 were physically unharmed. I checked my own damage. The shoulder was going to need proper attention. The ribs were bruised but not broken. The knee would cooperate if I did not ask too much of it. Manageable. I was kneeling in front of the group, doing a fast visual assessment, looking at their eyes, their posture, watching for shock when I felt something on my left arm. Small. Multi-jointed. Careful. Pip had placed one hand against my forearm, just above the wrist, not grabbing, just resting there. She was looking at me with all 8 eyes open, and her expression was the most serious thing I had ever seen on a child's face, in any species. I did not know what to say. She spoke first, formal Welschla, precise and quiet. You were afraid, she said. I could tell, but you did not stop. I looked at her for a long moment. No, I said. I did not stop. She nodded as if that confirmed something she had already suspected. Then she moved back to sit with the others, and I got to my feet and I went to check on the rest of the ship. Veltas, the captain, was alive and unharmed, and sitting in the navigation bay with the freshness of someone who had been asked a question they did not have any answer to. He watched me cross the bay toward the comm station. He did not speak until I had already sent out the emergency signal to the nearest Velshra. Diplomatic relay, he finally said. It was not quite a question. Unharmed, I told him. All 6. He was quiet again for a long time. I did not look at him. I had a signal to send and a report to file and a shoulder that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. I did not need anything from him right now. But I remember the silence. It was a different kind of silence from the one I was used to hearing from Velshra when they looked at me. This one had a different weight to it. Waystation Orvane was 14 hours away at standard cruise. I spent most of those hours in the ship's small medical bay, treating what I could treat and documenting the rest. I wrote my incident report in full detail. Every decision, every action, every moment I could reconstruct accurately. That is what the training teaches you. Document everything, because the truth does not become complicated if you wrote it down while it was still simple. I filed the report. I sent copies to the Neutral Zone Escort Registry, to the Velshra Diplomatic Consulate, and to the Dren Raider Compact's official complaint address, which was a real address that they maintained for legal proceedings, because even raiders had lawyers. Then I sat down with a container of water and thought about Pip's hand on my arm and the way she had said those words. You were afraid, but you did not stop. I thought about that for a long time. When we docked at Waystation Orvane, there was already a Velshra diplomatic delegation waiting on the platform. Standard procedure for the arrival of noble-born young. A receiving party, formal registration, medical check, transfer of custody documentation. I had seen the same process on 2 previous Velshra contracts, and it always moved with the same careful, precise rhythm. This time it did not move that way. The delegation's lead representative was a Velshra female, tall even by Velshra standards, dressed in deep blue, layered silk, with the particular bearing of someone who had been in enough serious rooms to have stopped being impressed by serious rooms. Her name was Velshan, and she held the title of diplomatic custodian, the official responsible for the welfare of noble-born young in transit. She came down the receiving ramp while the docking protocols were still completing, which was not standard procedure, and she went straight to the children first, as was correct. She moved through all 6 of them, touching each one on the forehead in a Velshra gesture of acknowledgement and relief, speaking to them in rapid, quiet Velshra that I caught only pieces of. She was checking them, counting them, looking at their eyes, their posture, exactly the way I had done, and for exactly the same reason. When she reached Pip, she stopped for slightly longer. Pip said something to her. I caught the human did not stop before the sentence became too quiet for me to follow, and Velshan's expression changed in a way I could not entirely read. Then she turned around. She had been given the incident report while we were in transit. She had read it. I could tell from the way she looked at me that she had read all of it, including the parts that were written in the flat, specific language of someone who had been trained to describe violence accurately, rather than dramatically. She stood in front of me, and she looked at me for a moment that lasted longer than most moments do. Then the drain arrived. Vorath and his crew had been restrained aboard the Velshra Patience for the duration of the journey. They were turned over to the Waystation Orvane Security Authority upon docking. Standard procedure for captured workers in neutral zone airspace. 2 Drain Compact legal representatives were already present, because the Compact maintained a permanent legal presence at every major waystation. They were efficient, and they were professional, and they wore the kind of expressions that come from having handled situations like this before. Vorath was escorted past us on the way to the holding facility. He looked worse than he had on the floor of the hold, because 14 hours of thinking about what had happened had not been kind to him. He looked at me as he passed. I looked back. One of his representatives stepped forward and addressed Velshan directly, in formal galactic common, with the practiced fluency of someone who spent considerable time in official proceedings. He said that while the Compact regretted the boarding incident, the use of force by the human escort had been disproportionate and unauthorized, and that the Compact intended to file a formal review of the Neutral Zone Escort Registry's licensing standards, with particular attention to the question of whether human personnel should be permitted to operate in a security capacity on vessels carrying diplomatic minor passengers. He said this while standing 4 feet from 6 children who had been grabbed and threatened in the dark. I watched Velshan's reaction. I had read about Velshra emotional response in the cultural briefing documents I studied before every Velshra contract. I knew in theory what it looked like when a Velshra reached the end of their composure. I had never seen it in person. The briefing documents had not fully prepared me. The sound started low, a subsonic vibration I felt in my chest before I could properly hear it, and then it built, fast and sharp, into a multi-layered cry that used frequencies I had not known Velshra vocal anatomy could produce. Every secondary eye along her jawline snapped open simultaneously. Her posture shifted into something that was taller and more angular than anything I had seen from a Velshra, a configuration that the briefing documents called formal fury display and described as something that had not been directed at a foreign representative in over 200 years of diplomatic record. Every person on that docking platform went completely still. "Did you harm the children?" she said. Her voice was controlled now, but the frequencies underneath it were not. "Do you comprehend what you are saying to me right now? Do you have any understanding of what awaits you?" The Dren representative opened his mouth. She did not allow him to use it. "Your operator boarded a diplomatic vessel. He took hold of a child of the Velshra. And you come to this station and stand in front of me and argue about the methods of the person who stopped him." She stopped, not because she had run out of things to say, but because she was choosing, very deliberately, to stop. She turned to me, and this was the moment I had not prepared for. Not the boarding, not Vorath, not 6 children in the dark and a door coming off its hinges. This was the moment that actually surprised me. Velshan looked at me, really looked, with all her eyes, with the same focused quality I had seen in Pip, and she bowed, a formal bow. The angle was deep enough that I knew it was significant. I looked at it later in the cultural briefing supplement and confirmed. It was the Velshra gesture of pure acknowledgement. Not gratitude, not courtesy acknowledgement, the gesture given to an equal. I did not know what to do with my face. I did what seemed right. I bowed back. She straightened. She said quietly, "Your report has been received and reviewed by my office. I have read it 3 times. I want you to know that." "I understand," I said. "I do not think you do," she said, and her voice was softer now, "but you will." The proceedings at Waystation Orvane ran for 9 standard days. I gave formal testimony twice, once to the Neutral Zone Security Council, once to the Velshra Diplomatic Archive Authority, which was recording the incident for historical documentation. Both sessions were long and thorough, and in both of them I told the same story I had written in my report, in the same language, with the same level of detail. I answered every question I was asked. I did not add to what I had done, and I did not minimize it. When one of the council members asked me whether I had considered the risk to the children posed by engaging the boarding party inside the hold, rather than attempting negotiation, I said that yes, I had considered it, and that I had assessed engagement as the option with the lowest overall risk to the children given the intelligence available to me at that time, and that I was prepared to explain that assessment in as much detail as was useful. I was asked to explain it. I did. WorldEarth's legal team made several arguments over the course of those 9 days. They challenged the proportionality of my response. They questioned my licensing authority. They suggested at one point that my actions had endangered the children I was contracted to protect. On the 6th day, the Velshra Diplomatic Authority called a witness that was not on the official list. Pip walked into the testimony chamber with the same careful, deliberate walk I had watched her use on the docking platform when she stepped away from WorldEarth. She was small in that room, the ceiling was high, the chairs were large. The panels of officials on the elevated dais were all adults and all considerably taller than she was. But she walked like the room was the right size for her. The presiding officer confirmed her name and her identity and her status as a primary witness, and then asked her to describe what she had observed during the boarding incident. She described it in precise, formal Velshra. There was a translation running for the non-Velshra members of the council, and I watched their expressions change as she spoke. She described the alarm, the run to the hold, the door being sealed, the sounds from outside, the way I had moved around the hold when the first boarder came through, and the second, and the rest. She described the moment Vorath entered with her. She described what I said to him. She described in specific detail the look on his face at the 7-second mark. Then the presiding officer asked her, as a final question, whether she had been afraid. Yes, she said. And the human escort, did she appear afraid? Pip was quiet for a moment, not uncertain, thinking. She was afraid, she said. I could smell it on her. I know what fear smells like. My teachers taught me. She was completely afraid. She paused again, and she did not stop. The chamber was quiet. I was sitting in the observer section, which was behind a partition, and I was very glad for the partition at that particular moment, because something happened to my face that I would have preferred not to have on the official recording. WorldEarth was found responsible on all charges. The Drain Raider Compact was ordered to pay reparations to the Velshra Diplomatic Authority, to the families of the 6 children, and to the crew of the Velshra patients. WorldEarth himself received a sentence that would keep him in a neutral zone detention facility for the next 7 years, with conditions attached that effectively ended his career in raider operations regardless of when he was released. His legal team filed an appeal. I was told the appeal was not expected to succeed. I did not follow the proceedings closely after that. On the evening of the 8th day, Velshan requested a private meeting. We sat in a small conference room off the main diplomatic wing of the way station. She had a document on the table in front of her. I had a cup of something warm that the dispensary machine had described as tea adjacent, and that tasted mostly like ambition and disappointment. She told me that the Velshra Diplomatic Authority had been reviewing the terms of its escort contracts in light of the incident. She told me that the review had produced a recommendation, and that the recommendation had been approved, and that she was authorized to make me a formal offer, a permanent position, full-time escort and security consultant attached to the Velshra diplomatic fleet, triple my current rate, formal standing within the diplomatic hierarchy, the same standing given to senior Velshra security personnel, housing, travel privileges, and a title that I would need several months of language study to pronounce correctly. I looked at the document. I looked at her. There is one thing, I said. She waited. The term soft skin, I said, or groundwalker, or any equivalent. I understand they're common. I understand they're not usually meant with hostility. But I will not work in an environment where the people around me use them, and I will not accept it as part of the professional culture I operate in. I kept my voice level. That condition is non-negotiable. Velshan regarded me for a long moment. Agreed, she said. I will have it written into the contract, explicitly. Then I accept, I said. She nodded. She picked up the document and made a notation in Velshra script along the margin. Then she extended one 6-jointed hand across the table, palm up, in a gesture I recognized from the cultural briefings as the Velshra form of agreement between equals. I placed my hand over hers. One more thing, she said. She was watching me carefully. Pip has asked to be informed when your assignment is confirmed. She would like to know that you are going to be present on future journeys. I thought about that small careful hand on my forearm, the serious eyes, the words spoken in the dark. Tell her yes, I said. People asked me later whether I was angry about everything that had come before. The contracts where I had been paid to serve on ships whose captains barely acknowledged my presence. The dismissals. The careful, elegant condescension of a species that hired humans for protection. and then spent the journey reminding us that we were not quite worthy of the rooms we were protecting. They asked if I was angry at the Dren for what they had tried to take, at the galaxy for being the kind of place that needed people like me in it. I thought about all of it for a long time before I answered. I thought about Pip's hand in the dark, about Velshan's bow on the docking platform, about a small Velshra child standing in a formal chamber and telling a panel of officials the one true thing about what had happened aboard that ship. She was afraid, and she did not stop. That was the whole of it, really. That was what we are. Not unbreakable, not without fear, not impressive by the measurements that most of the galaxy used when it looked at us. Just, we do not stop. We have never stopped. We have been afraid since the first time one of our ancestors looked up from a fire and saw something looking back at them from the dark. And we have been afraid in every dangerous moment, in every generation since. And not once in all of that long and difficult history have we ever found that to be a reason good enough to sit down. I was not angry. I was exactly what I was always supposed to be. I just finally had an audience.